Guys, we are finally in Season 3 of Chapter 2, which means that solo FNCS is right around the corner. And if you guys have been keeping up with this channel, then you know that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you guys are all ready for this upcoming season. And something that's been highly requested is a guide to competing as a solo player. You don't have any teammates, you don't have anyone to rely on, it's just you, your game sense, your mechanics, and a little bit of luck from RNG, hopefully. Okay, you can't always bet on luck from RNG, but you can bet on and take this one to the bank is that you guys are going to get consistent uploads from me for the rest of this season. So make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new, because we are coming out with this content every single week. And if you guys appreciate that, also make sure to use code hindog in the item shop. You guys don't understand how much that supports me. I'm a small creator, so I don't really make any money from this, but if you use my code in the item shop, it really helps me out in that way. So with that said, let's get right into the video. Now, the one thing that I have to mention every single time that I talk about a solo video is rotations. A smart rotation can often be the difference between surviving and getting a lot of points in the end game, or dying in the mid game with no points to show for all that time. Especially in solos, when you don't have teammates that could bail you out of a bad situation, it's all you. Everything's on your back, so we need to talk about how you guys can rotate cleanly without putting yourself in a predicament that would require someone else to bail you out in the first place. So I'm going to give you a broad statement and then I'm going to work back from there. The rule of thumb, the absolute rule of thumb that you should follow every single time when you're playing in a solo event is never rotate alone. Now, yes, this is solos. I'm not talking about no Ziff and Ronaldo situation. You're not rotating as a team per se with anyone, but rotating alone is one of the easiest ways for you to get eliminated. The entire lobby can focus you, or anybody that has a field of view on you can focus you because you're in a vulnerable state while rotating. Now, instead of rotating right after the next zone appears, I want you guys to settle back for a little bit and consider all of your options. Whether you're open rotating or using a launch pad, you definitely want to wait for other people to rotate as well, such that when you rotate, there's more targets that the lobby could choose to spray at that isn't you. This decreases your chances of getting killed while rotating and makes it so that you can actually play your end games. And plus, something that the pros do so often that gets overlooked is the fact that when they rotate, they allow people to get ahead of them and then they shoot them from behind such that the other person is going to build for them, so they get an absolutely free rotate into zone. Not only that, but sometimes they'll secure an extra elimination out of it, which, guys, if you watch the leaderboards, you know, the World Cup, millions of dollars were on the line due to 1 or 2 points. So, you know, this extra point can come in handy. Not only that, but also you're giving yourself more opportunities to get to endgame. Well, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. Unknown Army is one of the best examples that I can come up with because he's such a good mechanical player in solos and really does know how to use his brain, despite what people say about him being a brain-dead controller player. He sits back and waits. Despite having a clear rotation path, he lets his opponent go first and enters him into a false sense of security such that he gets an easy 100 pump and then finishes off the elimination. Now, what do you guys think would have happened if he rotated the moment zone pulled? He would have been on the other side of that exchange, so staying back and allowing that rotate to kind of naturally happen on its own gave him that elimination and gave him more opportunities than if he were to jump the gun. Alrighty guys, so moving into the next topic I want to cover with you guys, I think we need to talk a little bit about what fights you guys want to take and what fights you don't want to take. Specifically for this section of the video, I want to talk to you guys about how you can properly avoid confrontation. So, just like the last tip, I'm going to give you guys a rule of thumb and then I'm going to explain it further. And the rule of thumb is the earlier you are in the game, the less confrontation you want. Now, once again, it's just a generalization. If you have god loot right from the start, you go king, W key, do what you got to do. But for the vast majority of situations where you don't have godly loot, you need to follow this advice. We did discuss this briefly in a previous video, but I think it's worth discussing even further today. As you know, the earlier you are into a game, the more RNG there is. And with the more RNG there is, the more chance you're going to die. And if you're playing an FNCS where there's only 6 games to decide whether you're going to qualify or not, you must find out the best way to not die. The best way to not die is to not take a fight when you aren't absolutely confident that you're going to win that fight. So as the game progresses, the RNG gets minimized because you found more loot spawns, you've rotated more, you've mined more mats, and at that point, you can really make a more informed decision. That doesn't mean once you get into the mid game, take all the fights you want, because at that point, even though the RNG has been minimized, the RNG has also been minimized for your opponent as well. That means you're going to get into a fight against someone that probably has a lot of mats as well and pretty decent loot. Only if the situation arises where you need to get a kill or it's very optimal for you to go and take a fight, do it. But if it's not a necessity, then I highly request that you play for that endgame as so many pros do. Now, why do you think pro lobbies have such stacked endgames while regular lobbies have almost no endgame at all? It's because they know that playing the endgame is the right strategy no matter what. You'll get your kills during the end game, but you need to put yourself in a position where you can also get placement points. Now that we've talked about multiple points that'll comfortably get you guys to the end game, I think it's now time that we hit the nail on the head and talk about how you guys are going to take height in the end game and really rack up those points. Because let's face it guys, if you're on the high ground in the end game, you're racking up placement points, you're getting those free eliminations from those edge zone rotators, it's a pretty good time. So if you guys can get on the high ground safely, not burn all your mats, and be in a good position to get that victory royale, you're surely going to get a lot of points and qualify for FNCS. So there's a few situations with taking height that I want to go over, and I want you to deal with each situation differently. But there's no chance that you'd ever be able to take height unless you're acutely aware of what's happening on the high ground. Like, you can't just blindly go for high ground without knowing who's on the high ground to begin with. So the first thing you guys have to do every single time you're in the end game, even if you're not in a position to take height, is take a second every minute or so and say, okay, this person is on high ground, this person is on second high ground, and just kind of take a little bit of inventory and then go from there. Now that you know who's on height, you can respond accordingly. If you're in front of zone and there's a person that's barely edge zone on the back of zone on high ground, well, you can easily spam them off of the high ground as you crank up. Ensuring that you don't build towards them will give them an even harder time to connect themselves to another platform. So if you ever want to take height from someone that's in the back of zone, make sure to do 90s and don't ramp rush towards them, because then they can just connect themselves to you and keep height. Now this might work for first or second moving, but once you get to the really later zones, this isn't going to cut it. The zone is going to be too small for you to actually do anything. So you're going to have to start yielding the assets that are in your inventory, such as my good friend Clicks, who uses his RPG to perfection to take high ground, especially on low mats. You guys see that he abuses his rocket launcher while using the minimal mats to force his opponent down and take an ideal shotgun shot. He gets some mats from it, not too many, but just enough to secure him a second place finish, where if he dropped to the low ground, he would have maybe got an elimination, but he would have definitely not gotten the same amount of placement. Good looks, Clicks. Good looks. With that out of the way, I actually want to go back and talk about some more mid-game tips. Once again, 6 games to qualify. That's not a lot of games, so we need to get you to the end game every single time so you can capitalize on it properly. This tip is going to be revolved around positioning, and I want to start to give you guys an idea of how I like to position myself such that you can position yourself similarly in the mid-game. I want to introduce you guys to a concept of mid-game positioning known as elevation over positioning. The theory that I've been working on for quite a while is that no matter what, you want to be in a higher position than a more centered position in zone. So yeah, physically on a mountain or on a big house or on something that's going to give you a higher altitude than your opponents. I'm actually going to go back and pull up the zone that Unknown Army had to fight through in the clip that we talked about in tip number 1, and we're going to talk about where I feel like the most ideal positioning was. Now while you might think that going closer to the center of the zone would be the most ideal, you'd be absolutely wrong. I'd rather play a little bit closer to the edge and play on top of a hill such that I can walk down the hill and go into zone if the zone pulls farther away. If zone pulls onto me, then I already have the best positioning in the game and I'm going to be so set for endgame you guys don't believe it. But even in the worst case scenario where zone pulls so far away, well, it's a lot easier to drop down a hill than it is to climb up a hill. So I'd rather take my chances and have to rotate if I don't get zone than to have to actually burn all my mats to get up the hill and get into the prime positioning. So think about that the next time that you drop into a game, have a stacked game, and want to play the mid game correctly. Now, on to our final point. Last but certainly not least, I think it's time for us to talk about correctly protecting yourself as a solo. I'm really trying to drill in your guys' minds that playing as a solo, playing the solo game mode is a lot more risky simply because you don't have the strength in numbers. Now, despite not having teammates per se, you do have thousands and thousands of little soldiers in your inventory, something that's known as materials that can help you make it through the game. Something that I found to be a pain point during my time as a competitive Fortnite player was the balancing act of not using enough mats or using too many mats. And as you develop your mechanics, you'll find that getting a mat refresher becomes easier and easier, such that overbuilding becomes a more appealing notion. Someone once told me, and this really stuck with me, Hindo, why don't you build as much as you should be when the entire lobby is spamming you? Why don't you use all your mats such that if you die, you're gonna say, I died with no mats left. I died with no assets left. And that really stuck with me, guys, because, you know, I would die a lot of the times with 500, 600, 700 mats in my inventory. Why didn't I just try burning mats to stay safe once in a while? Okay, once in a while, I might be redundantly overusing mats, but if I'm saving my life, especially in a solo game mode, if I'm saving my life by building that extra tunnel or using that extra wall or really overbuilding to try to secure an elimination, well, if I know that my mechanics are decent enough to get a frag, to get that refresh, refresher, then why not use those mats to save my life and continue me going forward in the short term? Because in the long term, I'll get that elimination and I'll get a refresher that'll keep me alive once again. Plus, once you guys get around to the fact that overbuilding isn't necessarily a bad thing, I think you guys will quickly find out that piece control becomes a lot easier. And piece control, of course, if you guys aren't aware, is basically taking your opponent's walls and taking walls that you think would benefit your opponents if he were to take them. So obviously there's a little bit of overbuilding involved with that, but you're doing it as a precautionary measure to get the elimination. Now, if you're using more builds, but you're using more builds in order to kill people, you're killing people that are going to give you more resources. As one wise man once said, it takes money to make money. And in this situation, it's no different. It takes resources, it takes mats to make mats. So if you're getting into a fight, give it your all. If someone's pressuring you, give it your all. Use all your mats, use all your inventory. Don't cheap out. It's your life on the line. If you die, your opponent gets your mats. Don't allow that to ever happen. In conclusion, I think I can sum things up by saying playing solos is a very greedy and selfish game. You have yourself to look out for and nobody else. To play to your strengths, you have to get yourself in an endgame situation as much as possible. To do that, you're going to employ some of the tips that we talked about earlier, both in the early game and mid game, which will get you to the end game. And once you get into the end game, well, that's a whole nother story. You guys will have to clutch up and maximize those points. But I'll tell you one thing's for certain, if you're not getting to end game, you're not qualifying. So get to end game, make it count, and of course get to practicing. With that said, that's going to be all for me, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and hit the like button on the video. If you like the video, it actually promotes me a lot more on YouTube. And if you guys want to see me grow as a channel and want to see me have more supporters, I would really appreciate that. So go ahead and do that right now. Also, code hindog in the item shop if you guys are new or are planning on making a purchase. That would help me financially. I don't really make any money once again, so I would really appreciate that. With that said, I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace.